Hey there. Tonight, we're not telling a legend. We're walking into a narrow mountain pass where fear, loyalty, sweat, and blood decided the fate of the ancient world. 3 days, a few thousand men, an empire that believed itself unstoppable. This is the true story of Thermopylae. The ancient world did not know silence. It knew the sound of marching feet, the creak of leather armor, the groan of oars cutting through water, and the whispers of empires rising and falling. In the early 5th century BCE, the world stretched wide and dangerous, yet it was already shrinking beneath the shadow of a single power: Persia. To the east, beyond deserts and rivers older than memory, the Achaemenid Persian Empire ruled more land and people than any civilization before it. From the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean Sea, Persia was not merely a kingdom, it was a system. Roads stitched continents together, messengers crossed thousands of miles in days, gold flowed like rivers, and kings ruled not just by fear, but by organization. At its center sat Xerxes I, son of Darius the Great, ruler of kings, lord of lands, master of a force so vast that ancient writers struggled to describe it without resorting to poetry. And yet, on the far western edge of this empire lay something small, fractured, and stubborn: Greece. Not a nation, not an empire, but a collection of city-states, often bickering, sometimes at war with each other, fiercely proud and dangerously independent. Athens debated ideas in open-air assemblies. Corinth chased trade and wealth. Thebes watched its rivals closely. And then there was Sparta. Sparta did not argue. Sparta did not debate. Sparta trained. From the moment a Spartan boy could walk, his life belonged not to his parents, but to the state. Weakness was not tolerated. Comfort was considered dangerous, pain was a teacher, and fear was something to be mastered or destroyed. To understand Thermopylae, one must first understand what kind of men would choose to stand there. Sparta, a city built for war. Sparta was not beautiful. It had no towering walls, no magnificent temples, no bustling markets like Athens. Visitors often remarked that it looked unimpressive, almost poor. But that was the illusion Sparta wanted the world to see. Its true wealth was not gold, it was discipline. Spartan society revolved around a single idea: survival through strength. The Spartans were vastly outnumbered by the Helots, enslaved people who worked the land and sustained the economy. If Sparta ever appeared weak, rebellion would be inevitable, so weakness was eliminated early. Newborns were inspected by elders. If a child appeared sickly or deformed, tradition claims they were abandoned. Whether exaggerated or not, the message was clear: Sparta valued the collective above the individual. At age 7, boys entered the agoge, a brutal training system designed to strip away fear, softness, and individuality. They were underfed to encourage theft, beaten for getting caught, forced to endure cold and pain without complaint. They learned to fight not as individuals, but as parts of a unit: the phalanx. A wall of shields, spears angled forward, each man protecting the one beside him. Courage was not charging alone, it was holding the line. This was the world that shaped Leonidas. Leonidas, the reluctant king. Leonidas was not born to rule. He was the third son of Anaxandridas II, which meant he grew up expecting nothing more than a soldier's life. That mattered. Unlike kings raised in luxury, Leonidas endured the same hardships as every other Spartan boy. He knew hunger. He knew exhaustion. He knew what it meant to stand in formation and trust the man beside him with his life. When his half-brother Cleomenes died without a male heir, the crown passed to Leonidas. By then, he was already a seasoned warrior, married to Gorgo, a woman as sharp-minded as she was strong-willed. Leonidas ruled Sparta not as a tyrant, but as a guardian of tradition, and tradition would soon demand everything from him. The Persian wound that never healed. The war did not begin at Thermopylae. It began years earlier across the sea in the Ionian cities of Asia Minor, Greek settlements living under Persian rule. When those cities rebelled, Athens made a fateful decision. They sent help. The rebellion failed. The punishment was devastating. Darius I, Xerxes' father, did not forget the insult. He launched an invasion of Greece in 490 BCE. That invasion ended unexpectedly at Marathon, where Athenian hoplites shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. But Marathon was not the end. It was a warning. Darius died before he could avenge the defeat. Xerxes inherited not only the throne, but the unfinished business of empire. For years, Persia prepared. Ships were built by the thousands. Bridges of boats spanned the Hellespont. Engineers carved canals through solid rock. Supplies were stockpiled across continents. This was not a raid. This was annihilation by organization. An empire on the move. Ancient sources claim Xerxes' army numbered in the millions. Modern historians argue for lower figures, perhaps 100,000 to 300,000 soldiers, with support staff doubling or tripling that. Even at the lowest estimates, it was the largest military force Greece had ever faced. The army was a tapestry of the empire itself. Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, Indians, Scythians, different weapons, different armor, different languages, but all answered to one king. As the army marched west, cities submitted without a fight. Some Greek states sent earth and water, the traditional signs of submission. Others hesitated. Fear spread faster than the army itself. In Greece, panic followed. A divided Greece. When news of Xerxes' approach reached the mainland, unity was far from guaranteed. Many Greek states hated each other more than they feared Persia. Old grudges ran deep. Some leaders argued submission was wiser than resistance. After all, Persia allowed local rulers to remain in power if they obeyed. Athens, however, had no choice. Persia wanted revenge. Under the leadership of Themistocles, Athens began building a navy, funded by newly discovered silver mines. He believed the war would be decided at the sea. Sparta was hesitant, not because they doubted their strength, but because of religion. The Spartan calendar was sacred. During the festival of Carnea, military campaigns were prohibited, and as Xerxes advanced, the festival approached. To march out in full force would anger the gods, but to do nothing would invite disaster. The compromise would become legend. The Narrow Gate. Thermopylae. The name meant the hot gates, named after the sulfur springs that steamed from the earth. It was a narrow coastal pass, squeezed between mountains and sea. In places, it was so tight that only a few men could stand abreast. For an army like Persia's, numbers were useless there. For hoplites trained to fight shoulder to shoulder, it was perfect. Leonidas volunteered to lead an advance force, not the full Spartan army, but a symbolic one. He chose 300 Spartans, each with a living son, ensuring that their family lines would survive. They would not fight alone. Thespians, Thebans, and other Greek allies joined them, bringing the total force to around 7,000 men. It was not enough to win a war, but it might be enough to delay one. And delay was everything. March to fate. As Leonidas marched north, omens followed him. At Delphi, the oracle delivered a prophecy to Sparta. Either your great city must fall, or a king of the house of Heracles must die. Leonidas did not hesitate. He knew what it meant.
When his wife Gorgo asked what she should do if he did not return, he answered simply, "Marry a good man, bear good children." This was not bravado, it was acceptance. The enemy arrived. When the Persians reached Thermopylae, they were surprised. Xerxes expected an empty pass or a token resistance that would scatter at the sight of his army.
Instead, he saw Greeks calmly exercising, combing their hair, preparing as if for ceremony. Xerxes laughed. He was told these were Spartans, and that they were preparing to die. Here, the world holds its breath. The greatest army on earth stands before a narrow strip of land, and a king who has already chosen death. The sun had barely crested the jagged horizon when Thermopylae awoke. The narrow pass, sandwiched between the rugged cliffs and the restless Aegean Sea, trembled under the weight of expectation. The wind carried whispers of fear, courage, and the inevitable clash to come. Here, in this slender corridor of earth, destiny was not a distant concept. It was immediate, tactile, and suffocating. Every step, every heartbeat, every breath mattered. The calm before the storm. Leonidas walked the line, inspecting each man's armor, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. The 300 Spartans, sculpted by discipline and ritual, moved like statues, yet their muscles hummed with anticipation. Spears gleamed in the morning light. Shields adorned with the lambda of Lacedaemon reflected the first rays of the sun. Each warrior was not just a soldier, he was a symbol. Each shield carried the weight of Sparta itself. Behind them, the allied Greeks, Thespians, Thebans, and other volunteers formed a second line. Their armor was less uniform, their training less absolute, but their resolve was unmistakable. Together, this small contingent faced an enemy whose numbers seemed infinite. Stories claimed Xerxes' army was a flood, an ocean of men, horses, chariots, and elephants, stretching as far as the eye could see. But in the narrow pass, numbers were meaningless. Here, skill, discipline, and unity mattered most. The first contact. The Persian advance was methodical. Scouts and skirmishers moved first, probing the Greek positions. The distant glint of bronze and steel reflected off the morning sun. Xerxes, high on a throne mounted on a hill, watched the preparations with impatience. He had expected a brief skirmish, a symbolic gesture of resistance, before the Greeks fled or surrendered. The first clash came when a band of Persian light infantry attempted to move forward. Hoplites braced, shields locked in the impenetrable phalanx. Spears bristled like a forest of iron. When the Persians struck, the line held. Men fell, but the formation never broke. It was the first shock for Xerxes. His army, vast and overwhelming on open ground, found itself funneled into a corridor where only a few could fight at once. The Spartans were not just defending, they were teaching a lesson. Each fallen enemy became a testament to training, courage, and the terrifying efficiency of the phalanx. The Spartan phalanx, a wall of death. For outsiders, the phalanx may have looked simple. Men in rows, shields overlapping, spears pointed outward. But in reality, it was a living organism. Every hoplite relied on the man beside him. Any gap could be exploited. Any hesitation could be fatal. Leonidas's leadership was crucial. He moved along the line, shouting commands, offering encouragement, correcting minor errors with gestures or brief words. His presence was a force multiplier. Men fought harder, not out of fear, but because they believed their king stood with them. The Persians launched wave after wave of attacks. Archers filled the air with a deadly rain of arrows. Cavalry charged, but the narrow terrain prevented them from gaining momentum.
Immense numbers were reduced to mere dozens. Spartan spears met Persian shields. The clang of bronze against bronze filled the pass like the tolling of a bell of war. A king's resolve. Xerxes, observing from his elevated throne, grew frustrated. These are but a few men, yet they resist as if they were 1,000. He summoned his generals. Elite troops, known as the Immortals, were ordered forward. The Immortals were Persian nobility, trained from youth, feared across the empire for their skill and ruthlessness. Each carried a wicker shield, a short sword, and a bow. They were deadly in open terrain, but here they met the phalanx and they struggled. For the first time in his life, Xerxes saw numbers fail. The Greeks were not just defending, they were dominating. Hoplite spears pierced through armor, shields shattered upon impact, only to be reinforced by comrades. The Immortals began to falter, falling back only to regroup and charge again. Time and again, the Spartans absorbed the blows and returned them tenfold. The toll of combat. By midday, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the iron scent of blood. The narrow pass amplified every sound, the clash of weapons, the cries of the wounded, the rhythmic stomping of marching feet. Leonidas's eyes swept over the battlefield. Casualties were mounting, not just among the Persians, but Greeks as well. Though the hoplites were disciplined, they were human. Their bodies ached from the constant strain of holding formation. Even the strongest could tire, even the bravest could falter. Yet retreat was unthinkable. The pass was their weapon, their strategy, their lifeline. To fall back would invite slaughter, not just of the Spartans, but of the Greek allies. They were the shield of Greece, and they would not break. Tactics against overwhelming odds. The Persians began trying new tactics. Skirmishers flanked the Greeks where the terrain allowed. They attempted to use archers to thin the line, then deploy cavalry charges to break the phalanx. But Leonidas anticipated these maneuvers. He sent signals to his commanders, repositioned reserves, and reinforced weak points. The Greeks adapted, turning defense into controlled counterattacks. A well-timed push with spears could drive enemy troops backward, creating momentary chaos in the Persian ranks. Each retreating enemy became prey for another thrust. The battle became a grim dance of strategy and stamina. One could almost hear the unspoken rules. Do not break. Protect your neighbor. Hold the line. A test of morale. By the evening of the first day, both sides had suffered heavy losses. Yet morale was what truly mattered. The Spartans remained unshaken, their discipline and training evident in every maneuver. Persian soldiers, accustomed to easy victories, began to feel the weight of resistance. Xerxes grew furious. "How can so few defy me?" he demanded of his generals. His pride, vast as the empire he ruled, had not prepared him for such defiance. Persian soldiers, seeing their comrades fall to a handful of men, felt doubt creep into their hearts. Here, in the narrow pass, psychology became as important as weaponry. A small group of disciplined warriors had convinced an empire that victory was not inevitable. The night after the first clash. Night fell over Thermopylae. The sea lapped gently against the rocks, indifferent to the carnage above. Fires dotted the landscape. The Greeks tended to the wounded. The Persians retreated to regroup. Leonidas walked among his men. There were no speeches, no grand declarations, only quiet acknowledgement. Each man knew the cost of the next day would be higher, yet no one flinched. He wrote messages to allies, observing how his actions inspired not fear, but hope. In a world dominated by empires, by the dictates of kings, Thermopylae became a beacon, not because it would win the war, but because it had shown that courage could bend fate, even if only briefly. The first lessons of Thermopylae. The first day revealed a crucial truth. Strategy and discipline could overcome numbers. Leonidas's leadership, the cohesion of the phalanx, and the narrow terrain turned a hopeless situation into a defensive masterpiece. But the first day was only the beginning. Persia would learn, adapt, and strike again. The Spartans knew this. They knew their sacrifice was inevitable. They also knew that history, whether merciful or cruel, would remember their stand. As the fires burned low that night, the men of Thermopylae prepared. Spears sharpened, shields polished, minds steeled. The empire was not yet defeated, but it had been taught a lesson it would never forget.
The night at Thermopylae was quiet, but it was not peaceful. The narrow pass, littered with the remnants of the first clash, seemed to whisper warnings of what the coming day would bring. The men of Sparta and their Greek allies knew the Persian army would not relent. It was not in the nature of an empire that measured its might in millions of soldiers to pause. As dawn broke, the first light revealed the extent of the previous day's struggle. Spears were splintered, shields dented, and blood had turned the sandy soil into a dark mosaic. Yet, despite exhaustion and loss, morale among the Greeks remained resolute. Leonidas walked along the line, inspecting each man. "We hold here," he reminded them, "not because victory is certain, but because courage is eternal. Let the world remember that a few, properly led, can challenge the many." Persian adaptation. Xerxes observed the battlefield from his throne on the hill. His initial expectation that sheer numbers would crush the Greeks had failed. The immortals had been repelled, the phalanx had held firm, and the Persian army had suffered unexpected losses. "Send the cavalry," he ordered. "Bring the elephants. Let no stone, no man remain in their path." But the terrain conspired against him. The narrow pass prevented the cavalry from gaining speed. The elephants, terrifying in open terrain, were reduced to cumbersome targets, easily repelled by spears and trenches. Xerxes' generals attempted different strategies, rotating fresh troops, increasing archer fire, and trying to flank the Greeks where the cliffs permitted. Still, Leonidas anticipated each move. He had studied the geography meticulously. Every bend in the pass, every rocky outcrop became a defensive advantage. The discipline of Sparta. On the Greek side, discipline was everything. Each Spartan knew the drill: shields interlocked, spears angled outward, men in the second line ready to push forward if a comrade fell. When the first wave of Persian archers released their volleys, the hoplites braced. Arrows bounced off shields or thudded harmlessly into the ground. Every soldier knew that panic was more dangerous than the arrow itself. The phalanx moved as one, each hoplite an extension of the other. Their cohesion created a near impenetrable barrier. Where one man fell, another took his place seamlessly. The first day had been a trial, the second would be a crucible. The Persian assault intensified. By mid-morning, the Persians escalated their attacks. The immortals, reinforced with elite cavalry and specialized archers, struck again. They attempted to overwhelm the Spartans with sheer force, knowing that in prolonged combat, fatigue would become their ally. The Greeks countered every move. Leonidas rotated units, allowing some to rest while others held the line. Thespians and other allies covered gaps, their loyalty unwavering despite the bloodshed. The clash of bronze against bronze, the screams of the wounded, and the rhythmic pounding of marching feet created a symphony of war, a brutal, terrifying music that echoed off the mountains. The first signs of heroism. Among the chaos, individual acts of heroism stood out. Spartan warriors moved with precision, saving comrades, striking at key targets, and holding positions that seemed indefensible.
One hoplite, spear broken, grabbed a fallen comrade's weapon mid-strike and repelled a group of advancing immortals. Another shield-bearer took multiple blows, yet never faltered, his body a living barrier that bought his brothers time to regroup. These moments, while small in the scale of battle, became legends. They were the sparks that ignited courage in others, proving that discipline and training could turn desperation into triumph. Xerxes' frustration and obsession. Xerxes, watching from above, was consumed by frustration. His pride demanded that these Greeks be crushed, yet every wave he sent failed to break them. He began to obsess over the narrow pass itself, sending scouts to find alternate routes, searching for weaknesses that might allow him to outflank the defenders. But Leonidas had anticipated this. Scouts positioned on the cliffs and along hidden paths reported movements, allowing the Spartans to adjust in real time. Knowledge of the terrain became as powerful a weapon as the hoplite spear. The human cost. By late afternoon, the casualties had mounted on both sides. Persian losses were enormous, yet their numbers allowed them to continue the assault. Greek casualties, though smaller, were devastating in a relative sense. Every man mattered. Every life lost was a blow not just to the line, but to the morale of the few remaining. Leonidas moved among his men, encouraging, ensuring that no one broke under pressure. His leadership was not about invincibility, it was about presence, about embodying the courage he expected from others. The Thespians, fighting alongside the Spartans, refused to retreat, knowing their commitment might mean death. Their solidarity became a lesson in sacrifice, proving that bravery was contagious. A narrow escape from collapse. At one point, the Persian immortals managed to push a small section of the Greek line back. The Spartans responded instantly, regrouping and counterattacking. The enemy was driven back with precision, suffering heavy casualties. The phalanx, though strained, held. Leonidas's ability to inspire calm under fire, to see opportunity in the chaos, prevented the line from collapsing. The lesson was clear. The Spartans would not yield. Not tomorrow, not today, not ever. Night falls again. As darkness descended for the second night, the battlefield was transformed. Fires burned among tents and makeshift encampments. The wounded groaned, the survivors kept watch, and the stars bore silent witness to the sacrifice below. Leonidas convened with his commanders. The terrain was their ally, but it was finite. Supplies were limited. Fatigue gnawed at every strongest, yet the resolve of the men remained unshaken. They knew the Persian army would return in greater strength, but they also knew that Thermopylae could hold longer than any army expected. Every day, every hour, every man's life was a thread in a tapestry of defiance, a tapestry that would be remembered for millennia. The second day's legacy. The second day at Thermopylae solidified a truth. Courage and strategy could counter overwhelming odds, even against an empire. The Greeks had proven that preparation, discipline, and unity could make the impossible possible. But victory at Thermopylae was not the goal. Delay, resistance, and inspiration were. The Spartan stand was a spark, a symbol to the rest of Greece that the Persian tide could be resisted, that freedom was worth any price. As the men rested, tending to the wounded and fortifying positions, they understood the reality. The final day, the decisive confrontation was coming, and when it arrived, legend would be forged in blood.
The Greek line holds. Leonidas, unaware of the Persian discovery of an alternate path, continued his vigilant oversight of the line. The Spartans had built their defense around the natural choke point. Every man knew his position. Every shield overlapped with a neighbor. Spears pointed forward like a forest of iron, and no amount of cavalry or elephants could penetrate this narrow corridor. The Thespians, steadfast and disciplined, bolstered the line. Even the weary Thebans, who had been criticized by historians for perceived lack of enthusiasm, performed their duty with grim determination. For now, Thermopylae remained a fortress, but even the strongest walls can fall from within. The betrayal revealed. Xerxes' scouts had discovered a hidden goat path that wound through the mountains behind the Greek positions. This path, narrow and treacherous, was known only to locals and a few Persians. By secretly moving a detachment of his army along this route, Xerxes planned to outflank the defenders, cutting off their retreat and surrounding them completely. One Persian informant, who had been bribed or coerced, whispered to Xerxes that there was a weakness in the Greek vigilance. Some small number of men could traverse the mountains unseen. Xerxes' mind, fueled by obsession and pride, saw a final opportunity. This was not merely a tactic, it was treachery cloaked in geography. Signs of unease. On the Greek side, subtle signs of the impending threat began to appear. Scouts reported unusual movements in the cliffs, distant noises that suggested more than the main battlefront. Leonidas considered these reports carefully. "Perhaps an attempt to flank us," he murmured. "We must remain steadfast." But even Leonidas, seasoned warrior and king, could not fully prepare for betrayal born from secrecy and local knowledge. The Spartan discipline, honed over decades, would soon be tested in a way that training could not fully anticipate. The narrow pass, a double-edged sword. The pass had been the Spartans' greatest advantage. It allowed a small number of men to hold off a massive army. Yet it was also a trap. Should the enemy find a way around, escape would be impossible. Retreat would be death. Leonidas understood the stakes. He knew that if the Persian detachment succeeded in bypassing the main line, the 300 Spartans would be surrounded. There would be no reinforcements, no hope, only courage, strategy, and resolve. The arrival of the betrayers. By mid-morning, the Persian detachment navigated the goat path and descended behind the Greek positions. The Thespians and other Greek scouts sounded the alarm. Leonidas's face darkened, but he remained calm. Panic would be fatal. "Form ranks, protect the rear. We hold, as we always have." The Spartans, trained to respond under pressure, quickly formed a defensive perimeter facing the threat. Spears leveled, shields locked. Every man understood that the rear, once secure, would likely be where the final stand would occur. The psychology of betrayal. Betrayal cuts deeper than any sword. The Greeks had faced an empire, but the knowledge that their position could be undermined by secret paths and local complicity weighed heavily on morale. Some soldiers whispered fearfully, wondering if their families would hear of their deaths before their bodies were even found. Leonidas, sensing the unease, moved among his men. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. We fight for honor, for Greece, for those who cannot stand here with us, and we will be remembered. His words, simple but profound, rekindled the fighting spirit. The soldiers tightened grips on shields and spears, readying themselves for the confrontation that would decide the fate of their stand. The outflanking begins. Persian troops, guided by scouts who knew every bend and rock of the goat path, began to descend. They moved cautiously but decisively, aiming to strike the rear of the Greek lines. Leonidas observed their progress and calculated. There was no room to maneuver. Any retreat would be disastrous. The only option was to hold the front, resist the flanking force, and buy time for the remainder of the Greek forces to escape, if possible. He sent messages to the allies, urging some to retreat. The Thespians refused. They would stay, honoring their commitment. A small number of Thebans also remained, though some abandoned their posts. History would remember these choices differently, but in the moment, loyalty and survival clashed. The rear guard engagement. The rear of the line became a battlefield unto itself. Persian soldiers attempted to break through, but the Spartans adapted. Small groups moved to counter the flanking detachment. Every Spartan was a force multiplier, turning their smaller numbers into lethal efficiency. Yet the engagement came at a cost. Spartans fell, allies were wounded, and every moment of resistance was a battle against exhaustion and inevitability. The moment of realization. As the day wore on, Leonidas realized the grim truth. Thermopylae could not hold indefinitely. The Persian Empire's ingenuity, combined with overwhelming numbers, had found a way to circumvent even the strongest defense. But surrender was never an option. To retreat would be dishonor. To fight, even in the face of certain death, would be eternal glory. Leonidas prepared the men for the final phase of the stand. Every soldier was told, fight with everything, for every moment is history in the making. Evening approaches. As the sun dipped, shadows lengthened across the rocky pass. Fires from the main Persian encampment cast flickering light on the cliffs. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and smoke. Leonidas gathered his captains. Tonight we hold, not for victory, but for legend. Every man who stands with me becomes immortal. This was not rhetoric. Every Spartan understood the weight of history. They would fight not for themselves, but for all Greece, for freedom, and for the truth that courage could stand against overwhelming odds. The stage is set for the final stand. The betrayal had changed the battlefield. The flank was exposed, the enemy relentless, and the Greeks' options dwindling. Yet Thermopylae remained a symbol, a place where men could confront the impossible and defy fate, even for a moment. As night fell, the soldiers readied for the confrontation that would be remembered for millennia. Spears sharpened, shields reinforced, and minds steeled. Tomorrow, the mountains themselves would witness the greatest act of courage the ancient world had ever seen. The die was cast. History was about to be written in blood.
Every soldier's heart beat in rhythm with the words. The line of hoplites tightened, shields overlapping perfectly, forming the living wall that had repelled the mightiest army on earth. The Thespians stood beside them, unyielding, their loyalty unwavering. Even the Greek allies who remained understood that Thermopylae was no longer a battle for victory. It was a stage for immortality. The Persian onslaught. Xerxes had brought his full force to bear. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers surged forward, their banners stretching as far as the eye could see. Cavalry charged where possible. Archers darkened the skies with waves of arrows, and elite units known as the Immortals pressed relentlessly against the Greek line. Yet the Spartans did not falter. Each wave was met with precise coordination. Spears jabbed, shields clanged, and the phalanx moved as a single organism. Every Spartan knew the rhythm: hold, push, strike, repeat. Even the narrowness of the pass could not contain the Persian fury, but it amplified the Greeks' discipline. Numbers counted for nothing when men stood shoulder to shoulder, hearts aligned, and death was embraced with certainty. Moments of heroism. Throughout the day, acts of courage defined the battle. A Spartan warrior, wielding a broken spear, lunged at the enemy's rear guard, buying his comrades crucial seconds. Another, having lost his shield, clung to a comrade, holding the line against overwhelming odds. These were not random acts. They were the essence of Spartan training and culture: courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Every soldier fought not for survival, but for honor, for legacy, for the man beside him. Leonidas's tactical genius. Despite knowing that they could not win, Leonidas demonstrated tactical brilliance. He rotated troops when possible, covered weak points, and used terrain to maximize his small force's effectiveness. The Spartans' ability to anticipate Persian maneuvers frustrated Xerxes at every turn. Even as fatigue threatened to break the line, Leonidas's presence inspired resilience. His men knew that as long as he stood, the line could hold. Leadership, after all, was contagious. Courage inspired courage, and the Spartans embodied this principle perfectly. The flanking threat intensified. The betrayal discovered earlier, Persian forces navigating the mountain path, had begun to bear fruit. Soldiers appeared on the heights behind the Greek line, threatening encirclement. Leonidas recognized the inevitable. The pass could not hold forever, and escape for the Spartans was impossible. He made a decision that would seal his legend. The bulk of the Greek forces, including Thespians willing to retreat, were ordered to withdraw to safety. Only the Spartans, along with a few loyal allies, would remain to cover their retreat. This was the moment where duty transcended survival. Every Spartan accepted it. Every man understood that death here would be remembered for centuries. The last stand begins. As the remaining 300 Spartans braced for the final assault, the Persian army pressed relentlessly. Spears struck with fury, arrows rained down like a deadly hailstorm, and the immortals, relentless as ever, tried every tactic to breach the line. But the Spartans were immovable. Each man's shield was a barrier, each spear a spear of defiance. The phalanx, scarred from 2 days of combat, became almost mythical in its resilience. Every attack was repelled, every advance countered. Thermopylae had become more than a battlefield. It was a crucible of legend. The cost of glory. Inevitably, the Spartans began to fall. One by one, they were struck down, their bodies crumpling under the weight of overwhelming numbers. Leonidas himself fought at the front, a living symbol of defiance. Arrows pierced the air, spears clanged, and the sounds of combat rose to a deafening crescendo. Despite the losses, the remaining Spartans held firm. Retreat was impossible. Surrender was unthinkable. Each man's life became a statement. Freedom, honor, courage, and sacrifice were worth more than survival. The death of Leonidas. Amid the chaos, Leonidas continued to inspire his men. He struck down enemies with unmatched skill, rallied those around him, and refused to yield. Eventually, he was surrounded. Persian soldiers, countless in number, struck simultaneously. Yet even in his final moments, Leonidas remained upright, spear in hand, shield deflecting blows, a beacon of unyielding courage. His death, as recorded by history, was not a defeat. It was the ultimate act of leadership, to stand and fight when survival was impossible, to embody the values of Sparta, and to ensure that every man beside him could fight with courage. The legacy of the stand. By sunset, the Spartans' line had been shattered, but the stand at Thermopylae had achieved its purpose. The Persian advance had been delayed. The Greek retreat had been secured. More importantly, the courage and sacrifice of 300 men had inspired the rest of Greece to resist the empire. The story of Thermopylae, forged in blood and honor, would echo through history. It was a testament to the power of unity, discipline, and the human spirit when faced with overwhelming odds. The sun rose on the battlefield of Thermopylae, now eerily silent, except for the groans of the wounded and the distant clatter of the Persian army advancing through the pass. The narrow corridor that had witnessed 2 days of relentless combat and a final heroic stand now lay strewn with the fallen, Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and thousands of Persian soldiers. The earth was soaked with blood, yet Thermopylae was not a symbol of defeat. It was the spark that would ignite Greece.
The Spartans had paid the ultimate price, but their sacrifice ensured that the Greek city-states had time to regroup, to prepare, and to fight in the battles yet to come. The echoes of heroism and valor carried far beyond the mountains and the sea. The Persian advance continued. Xerxes, upon witnessing the final stand, felt a mixture of triumph and unease. Numerically, his forces had prevailed. The Spartans were dead, their line shattered. The pass was open. Persia's march into Greece would continue. Yet the sight of 300 men holding an entire empire at bay, their shields interlocked until the very last breath, was not easily forgotten. For the first time, the Persian king realized that courage could rival numbers. Thermopylae had been a lesson in human spirit, and it was not lost on him. Persian scouts reported the retreat of Greek forces who had survived the flanking maneuver. Persia pressed forward, confident that Athens and other cities would soon submit. But the Greeks were learning, they were observing, and they were preparing. Greek morale and the spread of news. Word of Thermopylae's events spread rapidly across the Greek world. Messengers carried tales of Spartan bravery, of the king who led his men into impossible odds, and of the Thespians who had stood alongside them. City-states that had previously been divided by rivalry and mistrust began to reconsider their positions. Courage, when witnessed in the flesh and in stories, became contagious. Thermopylae had done more than stall an empire. It had inspired an entire civilization to unity. In Athens, leaders debated their next steps. The city's navy had been fortified under the guidance of Themistocles. Ships were prepared for decisive battles at sea, where Greek ingenuity could counter Persian numbers. Thermopylae had given them the time to strengthen their fleet, organize alliances, and prepare for a war that would determine the future of Hellenic civilization.
The legacy of Spartan sacrifice. The Spartans' act was immortalized not only in contemporary accounts, but also in the hearts of their allies. Statues, poems, and oral traditions spread across the Greek world. Leonidas became a symbol of courage, a figure whose actions transcended life and death. For the Greeks, Thermopylae demonstrated the power of unity, discipline, and sacrifice. Even the small, independent city-states understood that to resist the Persian Empire, they could no longer fight in isolation. Cooperation was necessary, and Thermopylae had shown that courage could be a catalyst for collective action. Persian challenges despite victory. Despite their numerical advantage and the opening of the pass, Xerxes faced logistical and strategic challenges. His massive army, spread across hundreds of miles, required constant supply and coordination. The Greek forces, now informed by the heroic stand at Thermopylae, were no longer merely waiting. They were plotting, fortifying, and training for battles that would exploit the Persians' weaknesses. Moreover, the psychological impact of Thermopylae could not be underestimated. Soldiers in Xerxes' army who had seen so few men inflict disproportionate casualties began to doubt invincibility. Even an empire of millions could be challenged when confronted with unparalleled bravery and discipline. The uniting of Greek city-states. Thermopylae catalyzed unity among Greece. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and other city-states began to coordinate strategy, sharing intelligence and planning both defensive and offensive operations. The focus shifted to naval engagements, where Greek fleets could neutralize the numerical advantage of the Persians. Strategists like Themistocles advocated for tactical retreats, surprise attacks, and leveraging terrain to their advantage. The Greek military mindset evolved from scattered city defense to coordinated resistance, with Thermopylae serving as the inspiration that bravery could indeed influence outcomes against overwhelming odds. For the Greeks, the immediate aftermath was heavy with mourning. Families of the fallen Spartans and allies grieved, cities held ceremonies to honor the dead,
and the young soldiers who had survived were haunted by the images of their comrades' valor and sacrifice. Yet in grief there was resolve. The memory of Leonidas and the 300 Spartans became a moral compass, reminding the Greeks that courage and honor were not negotiable. Every soldier, sailor, and citizen who contributed to the defense of Greece carried a fragment of the spirit displayed at Thermopylae. Strategic implications for Persia. While Xerxes continued his march through central Greece, the impact of Thermopylae lingered. His forces, although technically victorious in the immediate tactical sense, had been slowed, tested, and psychologically affected. The Persians had underestimated Greek resilience and unity. Every city that resisted, every naval engagement delayed by Greek preparation could be traced back to the time bought at Thermopylae. The empire had achieved passage through the narrow corridor, but the seeds of strategic failure had been sown. The Greek resistance, inspired and united by the courage of 300 Spartans, was preparing for battles that would ultimately decide the fate of the Mediterranean world. The symbolic power of Thermopylae. Thermopylae's significance extended beyond military strategy. It became a symbol of the human spirit confronting overwhelming odds, a lesson in the importance of preparation, discipline, and sacrifice. Across Greece, citizens were inspired to contribute in ways both small and large, understanding that collective effort could resist even the mightiest of empires. Leonidas's words, deeds, and the image of Spartans standing as an unyielding wall of courage resonated through generations. For historians, poets, and philosophers, Thermopylae was not merely a battle, it was a narrative about the essence of courage, leadership, and legacy. Conclusion of the aftermath. In the wake of the battle, Greece had gained more than temporary tactical advantage. It had gained time, unity, and inspiration. Thermopylae had shown that even the smallest contingent, properly led and disciplined, could challenge an empire. The Persian army, although still vast and threatening, would face increasingly coordinated resistance. The sacrifices of Leonidas and his men were not in vain. They had altered the course of history, ensuring that the spirit of freedom, courage, and unity would endure. While the mountains of Thermopylae still bore the scars of battle, the Aegean Sea became the next stage of the Greek-Persian struggle. The narrow pass had delayed Xerxes, inspired the Greek city-states, and bought precious time. Now the focus shifted to the water, where Greek ingenuity, courage, and strategy could turn the tide against the overwhelming Persian navy. The Greek Naval Assembly. Themistocles, Athens' shrewd and visionary leader, oversaw the assembly of the Greek fleet. Triremes, sleek warships powered by rows of oarsmen, cut through the waters of the Saronic Gulf with deadly precision. Each ship, equipped with a bronze ram at its prow, was designed not for endurance battles, but for decisive tactical strikes. Athens had mobilized its fleet in anticipation of Persian retaliation. Corinth, Aegina, and other allied city-states contributed ships and men, forming a coalition that, though smaller in number than the Persian armada, was united in purpose. Thermopylae had shown the power of sacrifice on land. Now the Greeks sought to demonstrate it at sea, the psychology of naval warfare. Xerxes, confident from the land victories and the opening of Thermopylae, had dispatched a massive fleet. Thousands of ships crowded the coastlines, stretching as far as the eye could see. Yet numbers alone would not guarantee victory. Narrow straits, limited maneuverability, and the coordination of Greek forces could neutralize the Persians' advantage. The Greeks knew that bold tactics, inspired leadership, and intimate knowledge of local waters could allow them to overcome the numerical disparity. The battle would not be won by brute force. It would be won by skill, deception, and courage. The choice of Salamis. Themistocles selected the Strait of Salamis for the confrontation. Its narrow passages would restrict the Persians' ability to deploy their full fleet, turning their numbers into a disadvantage.
Each ship that attempted to maneuver or flank would be vulnerable to ramming and coordinated Greek counterattacks. Preparation was meticulous. Scouts observed Persian movements. Messages and signals coordinated Greek ships across the strait. Every trireme captain understood that miscommunication or hesitation could mean disaster, yet the sailors moved with confidence, their minds sharpened by the memory of Thermopylae, deception, and strategy. Themistocles employed deception to lure the Persian fleet into the straits. Greek ships sent false signals of retreat, creating an illusion of vulnerability. Persian commanders, eager for a swift victory, took the bait, moving their massive ships into confined waters where their advantage in size and number would be nullified. The plan required flawless timing. Greek oarsmen rowed in synchrony, coordinating rams and boarding parties. Archers on the decks provided cover, while Marines prepared for close combat. Every element of the operation relied on discipline and trust, lessons reinforced by the heroic sacrifices at Thermopylae. The battle begins. As the Persian fleet entered the straits, the Greeks struck with precision. Triremes rammed enemy hulls, breaking ships apart. The narrow waters prevented effective retreat or flanking, turning the battle into a series of chaotic, brutal engagements. The noise was deafening, the clash of bronze rams, the screams of sailors, the splintering of wood. Waves carried the chaos across the straits, yet the Greek formations held firm. Victory depended on coordination, morale, and the courage of each man on deck.
Tactical brilliance. The Greeks exploited every advantage. Persian ships became trapped against rocks or other vessels, creating choke points where Greek forces could attack effectively. Archers and slingers targeted commanders and oarsmen, disrupting Persian coordination. Themistocles' brilliance lay not just in planning, but in execution. Greek captains followed signals perfectly, timing attacks to create maximum impact. The once confident Persian navy now faced confusion, disarray, and losses they had not anticipated. Heroism on the waves. Among the Greeks, acts of heroism mirrored the courage at Thermopylae. Oarsmen rowed with exhaustion etched into their faces, yet never faltered. Marines leaped onto enemy decks to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Trireme captains directed attacks with unwavering focus, knowing that one misstep could sink not just their ship, but the morale of the entire fleet. Even smaller contingents achieved disproportionate effects. A single Greek ship ramming a Persian trireme could trigger chaos, allowing a coordinated Greek strike to destroy multiple enemy vessels in rapid succession. The Persian struggle. Xerxes watched from his throne on the shore, initially confident that his navy would crush the Greeks as easily as Thermopylae had been overcome. Yet he quickly realized the folly of relying solely on numbers. Narrow waters, Greek tactics, and disciplined crews turned his armada's strength into vulnerability. Confusion spread among the Persian sailors. Ships collided, commanders miscommunicated, and morale wavered. Thermopylae's lesson had carried forward. Courage, preparation, and unity could negate overwhelming numbers. The tide turned. By midday, the Greeks had gained the upper hand. Persian ships were sinking, crews were abandoning vessels, and organized resistance faltered. Themistocles coordinated attacks that exploited every weakness, ramming, boarding, and striking with lethal precision. The narrow straits amplified Greek skill and minimized Persian advantages. The result was a decisive shift. The Greek fleet, though outnumbered, controlled the battlefield. The Persian navy was on the defensive, struggling to regroup, and Xerxes' plans to march further into Greece were imperiled. The strategic outcome. The victory at Salamis was not just tactical, it was transformational. The Greek city-states, inspired by both Thermopylae and Salamis, gained confidence that Persian conquest was not inevitable. Xerxes' vast empire, though still imposing, faced a united Greek resistance that now controlled both land and sea strategies. The battle demonstrated that preparation, intelligence, and bravery could overcome raw numbers. The heroes of Thermopylae had set the stage. Now the sailors of Salamis sealed the lesson. Legacy of the naval counterstrike. The aftermath of Salamis strengthened Greek unity. City-states recognized the importance of coordination, strategy, and shared sacrifice. Athens' fleet emerged as a critical force, and Themistocles' leadership became legendary. The combination of land courage at Thermopylae and naval brilliance at Salamis forged a new narrative. Greece would resist, fight, and ultimately triumph, not because they were the largest, but because they were the smartest, most disciplined, and bravest. History would remember both the mountains and the sea as theaters where the impossible was made possible. The victories at Thermopylae and Salamis had reshaped the Greek world. Though Thermopylae had been a tactical defeat, it had inspired unity and courage. Salamis had been a decisive triumph, proving that the Persian advance could be checked. Now the stage was set for the climactic showdown, Plataea, where Greek city-states would consolidate their forces to finally repel the Persian invaders. This was not merely a battle, it was the culmination of years of preparation, sacrifice, and strategy. Every Greek soldier, sailor, and citizen understood the stakes. The very survival of their culture, freedom, and identity was on the line. The Greek coalition formed. Themistocles and Pausanias, leaders of the Athenian navy and Spartan army respectively, convened a council of Greek commanders. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Megara, and other city-states sent representatives. The Persians have proven formidable, but they are not invincible. Leonidas' spirit was invoked in speeches and strategy sessions. Discipline, unity, and courage will determine the outcome, not mere numbers. Greek generals coordinated land forces, determining positions for infantry, cavalry, and reserves. Lessons from Thermopylae shaped their strategy. Choke points, defensive formations, and knowledge of terrain would be pivotal. Every unit had a role, every soldier understood their importance, and morale was bolstered by the stories of heroic sacrifice. Logistics and preparation. Unlike the Persians, who relied on vast armies and extended supply lines, the Greeks operated with precision and efficiency. Troop movements were calculated, rations rationed, and communications maintained through messengers and signal fires. Spartan hoplites drilled tirelessly, maintaining the legendary phalanx formation. Athenian archers and cavalry prepared to exploit openings in the Persian lines. Engineers built fortifications, dug trenches, and prepared defensive positions across the plains of Plataea. The Greek forces were smaller than the Persian horde, but their preparation, coordination, and understanding of terrain allowed them to convert discipline into an asymmetrical advantage. Psychological warfare. The Greeks recognized that victory would not be achieved by strength alone. Stories of Thermopylae, acts of courage, and the image of 300 Spartans standing against an empire had already spread across Persia and Greece. The morale of Greek soldiers was high. They were fighting for their homes, families, and freedom. Persian forces, by contrast, were facing unexpected resistance, confusion, and increasingly coordinated attacks. Themistocles and other leaders knew that psychological advantage could be decisive. They used false retreats, feints, and deceptive positioning to lure Persian forces into traps, echoing tactics first successfully employed at Salamis. The role of Sparta. Sparta's military reputation, forged over generations, made it the backbone of the Greek coalition. Spartan hoplites drilled rigorously, maintaining cohesion and readiness even after the losses at Thermopylae.
Under Pausanias, Spartans took responsibility for key positions along the battlefield, ensuring that the Persian advance would be met with maximum resistance. Discipline, training, and the legendary Spartan courage became the central pillars of Greek strategy, complemented by the mobility and innovation of the Athenian forces. Allies and coordination. The Greek coalition was unprecedented in scale. Athens contributed naval experience, Corinthian and Megarian forces added infantry and cavalry strength, and smaller city-states reinforced with archers and light infantry. Every city-state agreed on a unified command structure, a remarkable feat given historical rivalries. Coordination meetings emphasized communication, timing, and contingency planning. The memory of isolated resistance at Thermopylae informed these strategies. The Greeks would not allow themselves to be divided again.
Strategic positioning. Plataea's terrain offered advantages to the defenders. Hills, rivers, and natural choke points allowed the Greeks to concentrate forces effectively. Cavalry units could flank and disrupt Persian lines, while infantry held strategic positions to absorb and counter attacks. Engineers fortified critical locations. Trenches and earthworks were dug, barricades erected, and signal systems established to ensure rapid response to enemy movements. Every step was planned, leaving little to chance. Training and morale. Greek soldiers engaged in rigorous drills, practicing formations, phalanx movements, and archery coordination. Oarsmen and sailors prepared for potential naval support in nearby waterways. Morale-building exercises, speeches recalling Thermopylae's courage, and the promise of defending homeland instilled determination. The Greeks knew that courage, combined with preparation, could turn even a desperate situation into triumph. Anticipating the Persian strategy. The Greeks studied previous Persian tactics, overwhelming numbers, flanking maneuvers, and psychological intimidation. At Plataea, they anticipated these moves, designing counters and contingencies. Greek scouts monitored Persian camps, noting troop deployments, supply lines, and weaknesses. Knowledge became a force multiplier, allowing the Greeks to choose the time and place of engagement rather than react passively. The calm before the storm. As night fell over the plains of Plataea, tension thickened the air. Soldiers maintained watch, engineers reinforced positions, and leaders reviewed plans. The Greek forces understood the gravity. The coming battle would decide the fate of Greece. Every man, from hoplite to archer to cavalryman, prepared mentally and physically for the challenge. Thermopylae had proven the power of courage. Salamis had demonstrated the effectiveness of strategy. Now Plataea would combine both in a climactic confrontation. Symbolism and motivation. Plataea became more than a battlefield. It symbolized unity, resilience, and the culmination of years of struggle against Persian aggression. For the Greeks, the memory of Thermopylae and the tactical triumph at Salamis provided motivation and focus. Even the youngest soldiers understood their role in history. Every position held, every maneuver executed, would contribute to a narrative larger than any individual, a narrative that would define Greece for generations. The stage is set. By dawn, the Greek forces were in position. Infantry lined the ridges, cavalry stood ready on the flanks, archers and light infantry manned the fore and rear positions. Commanders signaled readiness, and soldiers held formation with unwavering discipline. The Persian army, massive and confident, prepared to march into the plains. Yet the Greeks were ready. Every element, courage, strategy, terrain, and unity was aligned for the decisive confrontation. Plataea awaited. History was poised to be written in blood, strategy, and heroism.
The dawn of the decisive day at Plataea broke with a golden haze across the plains. The Greek forces, now fully consolidated, lined the ridges and valleys, a disciplined wall of shields, spears, and determination. Every hoplite, archer, and cavalryman knew the weight of history pressing upon them. Across the field, the Persian army stretched endlessly, banners fluttering in the wind, a seemingly unstoppable tide ready to crash upon Greece. Yet the Greeks had learned. Thermopylae had taught them courage. Salamis had shown them strategy. Now every lesson merged into a single, resolute purpose: the defense of freedom and homeland against an empire that underestimated the power of unity and valor. The calm before the first clash. The plains of Plataea were tense with anticipation. Soldiers checked weapons, reinforced armor, and silently reviewed formations. Archers nocked arrows, cavalrymen adjusted their mounts, and hoplites locked shields into the iconic phalanx formation. Greek generals, including Pausanias and Themistocles, moved among the troops, offering words of encouragement, strategic reminders, and the occasional firm order. Every man knew his place. Every formation was precise. This was not a battle of chaos, but a battle of calculated courage. Xerxes' confidence and Persian formation. Xerxes, observing from the hills with his generals, believed victory was inevitable. His army, though bruised from previous encounters, numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Persian infantry formed the center, while cavalry lined the flanks, and elite units were positioned for decisive strikes. Yet Xerxes' confidence would soon meet the consequences of underestimating a united, disciplined, and motivated foe. The Greeks had fortified positions, coordinated reserves, and a profound psychological edge inspired by Thermopylae's courage and Salamis's strategy. The first contact. The battle commenced as Greek scouts reported movement from the Persian center. Cavalry skirmishes erupted at the edges of the plains, testing the flanks. Greek archers responded with volleys that disrupted Persian formations, targeting officers and exposed troops. The first clashes of infantry followed. Hoplites met Persian infantry with a wall of shields and spears. Greek discipline transformed each engagement into a choreographed clash, each push and parry calculated to maximize impact and minimize exposure. Phalanx in action. The Spartan phalanx, reinforced by allied infantry, became the backbone of Greek resistance. Shoulder to shoulder, shields interlocked, spears thrust forward in a deadly forest of iron. Persian attempts to break through were met with unyielding force. Spartan discipline and training turned numerical inferiority into a tactical advantage. Each step, each push of the shield line repelled attacks and inflicted heavy casualties, creating a psychological as well as physical barrier that the Persian forces could not easily overcome. Cavalry maneuvers and flank engagements. Greek cavalry, coordinated with infantry and archers, executed precise flanking maneuvers. Persian cavalry, though numerous, struggled in the narrow and uneven terrain. Athenian cavalry units struck swiftly at exposed flanks, while light infantry harassed supply lines and rear formations. These coordinated attacks disrupted Persian momentum, preventing the empire from leveraging its superior numbers effectively. The battlefield was a dynamic tapestry of engagements, where every Greek soldier played a role in a larger strategic design. The tide turned. By midday, the cumulative effect of Greek coordination, terrain advantage, and morale became evident. Persian formations began to falter, cavalry struggled to maintain cohesion, and elite units found themselves isolated. The Greeks, inspired by Thermopylae and Salamis, pressed forward with a combination of disciplined defense and calculated counterattacks. Every arrow,
Every spear thrust and every cavalry charge was executed with precision, turning the battle from a defensive struggle into a decisive offensive. Heroism amid chaos. Amid the chaos, individual acts of heroism shone. Spartan warriors defended key positions against overwhelming odds, buying time for allied troops to maneuver. Athenian archers, perched on slight rises, unleashed deadly volleys that decimated Persian officers. Even smaller Greek contingents executed maneuvers that caused disproportionate disruption among Persian ranks. Thermopylae had taught them the value of courage in the face of overwhelming numbers, and Salamis had shown the power of coordinated action. At Plataea, these lessons converged. Persian struggle and leadership challenges. Xerxes watched as his army faltered. Despite sheer numbers, coordination was failing. Communication lines were stretched, units became isolated, and the psychological impact of Greek courage and strategy was apparent. Persian commanders attempted to rally troops, but the cohesion of the Greek forces, combined with terrain advantages and relentless pressure, made traditional Persian tactics ineffective. The might of an empire being countered by unity, intelligence, and indomitable spirit.
Greek resilience and coordination. The Greek forces, moving as a single organism despite diverse city-state contingents, exploited every weakness in Persian lines. Infantry held critical points, cavalry executed flanking attacks, and archers and skirmishers provided continuous support. The coordination of land and supporting naval forces along nearby rivers enhanced tactical flexibility. Every element, from hoplite to commander, understood the strategic goal: contain, disrupt, and ultimately crush the Persian advance. Turning points in the midday clash. Several pivotal moments defined the battle. A concentrated Greek assault on the Persian center created a breach, causing confusion and retreat in adjacent units. Spartan reserves reinforced the front line, maintaining pressure while allies exploited openings. Persian morale wavered. Troops witnessing elite units fail to advance began to panic. The tide of battle, once seemingly in favor of the empire, now shifted decisively toward the Greeks. The aftermath of the first engagement. As dusk approached, Persian forces were significantly weakened. Thousands had fallen, formations were fragmented, and command structure strained. Greek forces, though battered, remained cohesive, disciplined, and ready to continue the assault. The first day of Plataea demonstrated the effectiveness of unity, courage, and strategy. Thermopylae had shown the value of sacrifice, Salamis the value of strategy, and now Plataea revealed the cumulative effect of preparation, coordination, and moral fortitude. Preparing for the next phase. Greek generals convened brief councils during pauses, repositioning units, reinforcing flanks, and preparing for renewed assaults. Reserves were readied, and the soldiers, though weary, maintained focus. Every man understood that victory was within reach, but the battle was far from over. The final confrontation required sustained courage, relentless pressure, and precise coordination. The first clashes at Plataea had tested every Greek soldier's courage, discipline, and endurance. Though the battle had begun with uncertainty, as the sun climbed higher, a subtle shift became apparent. The Spartans' phalanx held firm, the Athenians' flanking maneuvers disrupted Persian cavalry, and the Greek coordination that had been forged through Thermopylae and Salamis was beginning to overwhelm the Persian forces. The tide of battle, once favoring the empire, was now slowly turning in favor of Greece. Spartans anchor the line. At the center of the battlefield, Spartan hoplites formed an immovable wall of shields and spears. Every thrust, parry, and step was precise. Persian infantry, despite repeated charges, found themselves repelled time and again. The Spartan line became a pivot around which the Greeks could execute offensive operations.
Units rotated as needed to maintain stamina, with younger hoplites stepping in to relieve weary veterans. Each Spartan understood that holding the center was vital, not just for tactical reasons, but as a symbol of unyielding courage, echoing Leonidas's stand at Thermopylae. Cavalry strikes and flanking maneuvers. Greek cavalry, composed of contingents from Corinth, Thessaly, and Athens, executed coordinated strikes on exposed Persian flanks. Fast, disciplined, and coordinated, they disrupted enemy formations, cutting off retreating units and isolating key commanders. These flanking maneuvers caused confusion in the Persian lines, slowing their advance and creating pockets of vulnerability. Greek infantry exploited these breaches, advancing into positions where previously Persian numbers would have overwhelmed them. Archers and light infantry dominated the perimeter. Athenian archers and light infantry were positioned strategically along ridges and natural barriers. Their continuous volleys of arrows and javelins inflicted heavy casualties on exposed Persian units, further disrupting morale. The Greeks demonstrated a mastery of combined arms. Infantry held the center, cavalry executed flanking maneuvers, and ranged troops provided support that multiplied the effectiveness of each strike. Persia's once cohesive formations began to splinter under this pressure. Heroism and tactical brilliance. Acts of individual heroism punctuated the broader strategy. Spartan warriors, defending critical positions, held off significantly larger groups of Persian soldiers. Athenian commanders inspired troops with quick adjustments and daring maneuvers, exploiting every opening. Even smaller Greek contingents achieved disproportionately high impact, reminiscent of the actions at Thermopylae. Courage, when combined with strategy and coordination, turned the battlefield into a canvas of calculated heroism. The psychological impact on Persia. The Persian army, vast and confident, now faced a foe that seemed limitless in courage, skill, and resolve. Initial confidence had eroded into caution, then confusion. Commanders shouted orders, yet communication faltered and units became disorganized. Xerxes, witnessing these developments, realized that his numerical superiority could not overcome disciplined, united, and strategically positioned forces. For the first time, doubt shadowed the Persian mind. The Greeks were not merely resisting, they were winning. Coordinated Greek offensives. Themistocles and Pausanias coordinated a series of offensives to capitalize on Persian weaknesses. Infantry advanced in concert with cavalry charges, while archers and skirmishers maintained pressure from elevated positions. The Greeks exploited terrain, using natural barriers to funnel Persian forces into choke points, where the advantages of Greek discipline and weaponry could be maximized. Every maneuver was rehearsed, timed, and executed with precision, demonstrating the cumulative effect of training and strategic insight. Breaking Persian morale. As casualties mounted and formations faltered, Persian morale began to collapse. Elite units, previously seen as unstoppable, were forced into retreat. The psychological advantage that once belonged to Persia shifted irrevocably to the Greeks. Greek soldiers, inspired by both Thermopylae and Salamis, pressed forward with confidence. Every fallen comrade at Plataea became a rallying point. Every tactical success a reinforcement of resolve. The role of leadership. Greek generals were constantly visible on the battlefield, coordinating movements, reinforcing units, and maintaining morale. Pausanias moved among the Spartan phalanx, inspiring steadfastness. Themistocles oversaw flanking maneuvers and ensured that communication between infantry and cavalry remained seamless. Leadership on both strategic and personal levels proved decisive. Persian commanders, in contrast, struggled to maintain cohesion and effectiveness, highlighting the critical importance of unity and vision in warfare. The turning point. By mid-afternoon, Greek forces had gained decisive momentum. Persian units were fragmented, leaders isolated, and flanks exposed. The Spartan phalanx advanced steadily,
while cavalry units encircled retreating forces and ranged units inflicted relentless pressure. The tide had fully turned. Persia's once mighty army now faced the reality that defeat at Plataea was imminent. Greek coordination, courage, and tactical brilliance had not only repelled the invaders, but were now driving them from the field. Symbolism and legacy in the midst of battle. The actions at Plataea were more than tactical maneuvers. They were the embodiment of centuries of Greek military culture, the lessons of Thermopylae, and the ingenuity displayed at Salamis. Every soldier understood that their courage, discipline, and skill would be remembered long after the battle ended. Thermopylae had shown the value of sacrifice, Salamis the value of strategy, and now Plataea revealed the cumulative effect of preparation, coordination, and moral fortitude. Preparing for the next phase.
Greek forces, sensing Persian disarray, readied for the final assault. Reserves moved into optimal positions, cavalry units circled to prevent escape, and infantry tightened formations. Every element of the Greek army was poised for a coordinated push that could end the Persian threat once and for all. The soldiers, though fatigued, were resolute. They carried the courage of Thermopylae, the cunning of Salamis, and the unity forged across battles into what would become the defining moment of Plataea. As the sun climbed high over the plains of Plataea, the Greek forces readied themselves for the decisive push that would determine the fate of Greece. The battle had raged for hours, testing courage, discipline, and endurance. Persian forces, once confident and disciplined, now faltered under relentless Greek pressure. The moment had come for the Greeks to turn tactical advantage into decisive victory. The stage was set for the climactic phase of the confrontation, where every maneuver, every spear thrust, and every act of bravery would define the outcome. Spartan phalanx advances. At the center, the Spartan phalanx moved with calculated precision. Shields locked, spears bristling, they advanced steadily, absorbing attacks while maintaining formation. Persian infantry attempted desperate counterattacks, but each surge was repelled with Spartan resilience. The psychological impact of the Spartans' advance was immense. Persian soldiers, witnessing these legendary warriors push forward despite fatigue and casualties, began to doubt their commanders and the inevitability of victory. The Spartans' advance created momentum, anchoring Greek operations and allowing flanking units to exploit weaknesses elsewhere on the battlefield. Greek cavalry strikes decisively. On the flanks, Greek cavalry executed a series of coordinated strikes. Corinthian, Thessalian, and Athenian horsemen charged exposed Persian positions, cutting off retreat routes and disrupting formations. The cavalry's speed and precision magnified the effect of the Spartan push. Isolated Persian units were enveloped, their cohesion destroyed. Each successful strike amplified the morale of Greek forces, turning the battlefield into a momentum-driven assault where every maneuver reinforced the next. Archers and skirmishers maintained pressure. Greek archers and light infantry continued to harass the Persian lines. Elevated positions allowed volleys of arrows to target enemy officers and disrupt communication. Skirmishers exploited terrain, forcing Persian units into disadvantageous positions where they could be overrun by advancing hoplites and cavalry. The combination of ranged attacks and close-quarters combat created a layered assault that Persian forces could not effectively counter. The synergy of Greek arms, infantry, cavalry, and archers maximized battlefield efficiency and minimized vulnerability. Breaking the Persian center. The Spartan phalanx, reinforced by allied infantry, struck at the heart of the Persian center. Spears clashed, shields collided, and the ground shook with the force of disciplined soldiers pressing forward. Persian units began to fracture, unable to withstand the cohesion and relentless pressure of Greek forces. Commanders attempted to rally troops, but coordination had collapsed. Panic spread through the center, and gaps appeared in the lines, which Greek forces exploited ruthlessly.
The breakthrough of the center marked a turning point in the battle, signaling that victory was within reach. Heroism and sacrifice. As the battle intensified, acts of heroism became pivotal. Spartan warriors held critical points against overwhelming numbers, buying time for reinforcements to consolidate gains. Athenian troops executed daring flanking maneuvers, capturing key positions and cutting off retreating Persian soldiers. Even smaller units achieved disproportionate results. Greek soldiers displayed courage reminiscent of Thermopylae, demonstrating that bravery combined with strategy could overcome overwhelming odds. Every soldier understood that their actions would shape history. Persian collapse begins. The Persian army, previously a disciplined force, now descended into chaos. Units abandoned positions, fled the field, or were encircled by coordinated Greek assaults. Xerxes' generals struggled to maintain control, but panic and fragmentation spread too quickly. The numerical superiority that once defined Persia was now a liability. Crowded formations made retreat hazardous, and Greek forces exploited every opportunity. Momentum, discipline, and morale had shifted decisively to the Greeks. The final push. Greek commanders coordinated the final push across the battlefield. Infantry advanced steadily, cavalry executed envelopment, and archers targeted remaining Persian leaders. The Spartan phalanx led the charge, unwavering and disciplined, as Greek forces closed in on the fractured enemy. Every step, every thrust, and every maneuver was executed with precision, maximizing impact while minimizing exposure to counterattacks. Xerxes' retreat. Xerxes, witnessing the collapse of his army, realized the battle was lost. Persian forces, now in disarray, began a chaotic retreat. Many soldiers were cut down during the withdrawal, trapped by Greek cavalry and encircled infantry. The retreat marked the decisive victory for the Greeks. Years of preparation, lessons from Thermopylae and Salamis, and disciplined execution culminated in the destruction of the Persian threat on land. Aftermath of the decisive push. By dusk, the battlefield of Plataea lay in silence except for the groans of the wounded and the celebration of victors. Greek forces had achieved what seemed impossible. They had repelled a vast imperial army, secured their homeland, and demonstrated the power of unity, strategy, and courage. The lessons of Thermopylae, sacrifice against overwhelming odds, and Salamis, strategic genius, had converged in Plataea, creating a moment that would define Greek history and inspire generations to come. Greek morale and consolidation. Greek soldiers, exhausted but elated, consolidated their positions. Medics attended to the wounded, tending to injuries sustained during hours of relentless combat. Engineers reinforced key positions to ensure that retreating Persian forces could not regroup or counterattack. Victory at Plataea was not only tactical, but symbolic. Greek city-states, once divided, had acted in unison to secure freedom. The army's morale, strengthened by disciplined execution and shared heroism, solidified the bonds between allied states. The legacy of the decisive push. The crushing of Persian lines at Plataea marked the end of Xerxes' ambitions in Greece. It demonstrated that courage, strategy, unity, and discipline could overcome even the mightiest of empires. Plataea became a testament to human spirit and collective action. Thermopylae's sacrifice, Salamis's tactical genius, and Plataea's decisive push combined to secure Greece's independence and influence the course of Western civilization for centuries.
Leaders, including Pausanias and Themistocles, organized the army for orderly withdrawal, maintaining discipline even in moments of celebration. Soldiers, weary but exhilarated, understood that victory required both courage and prudence. Every Greek who had fought that day carried the weight of history and the responsibility to secure the future. Honoring the fallen. Even in victory, the cost was deeply felt. Thousands of Greeks had died, including brave Spartans, Athenians, and allies from smaller city-states. Ceremonies and rituals were held to honor the fallen, with leaders speaking of their sacrifice as the foundation of freedom. Thermopylae's memory resonated strongly. The 300 Spartans whose stand had inspired the nation were remembered not just as soldiers, but as symbols of courage and selflessness. Families and communities mourned, yet they also took pride in knowing that their loved ones' sacrifice had secured the survival of Greek civilization. The Persian retreat. Xerxes' army, shattered and demoralized, withdrew from Greek territory. The remnants of his once mighty force were scattered, suffering from exhaustion, disease, and pursuit by Greek units. Persia's ambitions in Greece had been decisively thwarted. The retreat marked a turning point not only in the war, but in the broader perception of Persian invincibility. Across the Mediterranean, the tales of Greek resistance spread, inspiring allies and striking fear into those who had assumed that the empire was unstoppable. Celebration across the city-states. In Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and beyond, news of Plataea's victory sparked jubilation. Citizens poured into the streets, celebrating not just military triumph, but the reaffirmation of their freedom and shared identity. Temples were dedicated, sacrifices offered to the gods, and civic ceremonies honored both leaders and ordinary soldiers. The victory strengthened bonds between city-states that had long been divided by rivalry. For the first time in generations, Greek unity had demonstrated its power, forging relationships that would influence politics, commerce, and culture for decades. Lessons learned. The Greek victories highlighted the importance of strategy, discipline, and morale. Thermopylae had taught the value of courage against overwhelming odds. Salamis had demonstrated the effectiveness of intelligence and tactical innovation. Plataea combined these lessons, proving that preparation, coordination, and unity could achieve the seemingly impossible. Leaders reflected on these lessons, ensuring that future generations would understand the principles that had allowed a collection of city-states to resist an empire. Military treatises, oral histories, and poetry immortalized the strategies and heroism displayed across the battles. The role of leadership. Leadership had been pivotal. Pausanias's command of the Spartan forces ensured discipline and resilience. Themistocles' naval genius had turned Salamis into a decisive victory. Corinthian and other allied commanders coordinated effectively, demonstrating that a coalition could succeed when guided by strategic vision and mutual respect. The collaboration of these leaders ensured that Greek forces acted as a cohesive entity rather than disparate groups, turning potential vulnerability into a formidable strength. Cultural and moral impact. The Greek triumphs had profound cultural implications. Stories of courage and strategy became integral to Greek identity, inspiring literature, drama, and philosophy. Freedom was no longer an abstract ideal. It was defended, earned, and celebrated. The moral of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea extended beyond the battlefield. Unity, courage, and intelligent action could shape history. Greek children learned the tales of Leonidas and Themistocles, internalizing lessons of honor, sacrifice, and perseverance. Strategic implications for the future. With the Persian threat diminished, Greece could turn attention to internal development, trade, and cultural flourishing. Athens emerged as a naval power. Sparta retained its reputation for military excellence, and alliances forged through shared struggle strengthened political stability. The victories had secured not just immediate survival, but the foundation for the classical age of Greece, a period of philosophy, art, science, and democratic experimentation that would influence civilizations for millennia. A moment of reflection. Soldiers and citizens alike took time to reflect. The battlefield, once a site of carnage, became a place of remembrance and gratitude.
Monuments would be erected, stories would be told, and songs would honor those who had given everything for freedom. Thermopylae reminded the world that courage matters. Salamis demonstrated that intellect and strategy could overcome overwhelming force. Plataea showed that unity and perseverance could turn the tide decisively. Together, these battles defined the essence of Greek resilience and the enduring power of human determination. The spirit of Greece. The collective spirit of Greece emerged stronger than ever. Victory was not merely in surviving or defeating an enemy, it was in defending principles, inspiring unity, and demonstrating that even small, disciplined, and courageous communities could influence the course of history. Greek identity, forged through struggle and triumph, would guide generations. The lessons of sacrifice, strategy, and solidarity at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea became timeless, influencing military thought, civic responsibility, and cultural pride for centuries to come. The echoes of swords clashing, shields splintering, and oars striking the waves had long faded from Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea, yet their impact reverberated across centuries. These battles were more than military engagements. They were the defining moments of Greek identity, courage, and strategy, shaping the course of Western civilization. The lessons learned and the myths created in these three pivotal confrontations transcended time, inspiring generations to value sacrifice, ingenuity, and unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Thermopylae, the symbol of sacrifice. Thermopylae was a story of defiance, heroism, and ultimate sacrifice. The 300 Spartans, alongside their allies, held the narrow mountain pass against a Persian army many times their size. Though they fell, their stand was not in vain. Thermopylae taught the world that courage is not measured by numbers, but by resolve. The Spartans' sacrifice bought critical time for Greek city-states to prepare for the larger struggle, proving that a small, disciplined force could delay and shape the movements of a vast empire. This battle became a symbol of bravery, immortalized in literature, art, and cultural memory. Thermopylae inspired not just military thinkers, but anyone facing seemingly insurmountable odds, demonstrating that valor and commitment can change history. Salamis, the triumph of strategy. Where Thermopylae was a lesson of sacrifice, Salamis was a testament to intelligence and innovation. Themistocles' cunning lured the Persian fleet into narrow straits where numbers counted little. Greek triremes, agile and coordinated, devastated a fleet far larger than their own. Salamis demonstrated that intellect, preparation, and tactical brilliance could overcome overwhelming force. It shifted the momentum of the war and highlighted the importance of leadership, deception, and mastery of the environment. For the Greek city-states, Salamis solidified the principle that strategic thinking could amplify the effectiveness of courage and manpower. The naval victory ensured that Persia could not exploit its numerical advantage and paved the way for future Greek triumphs on land. Plataea, the culmination of unity. Plataea, the final act of this epic struggle, showcased the full power of Greek unity. For the first time, the city-states coordinated their forces seamlessly, blending Spartan discipline, Athenian innovation, and allied contributions into a cohesive, unstoppable force.
At Plataea, strategy, courage, and coordination combined to crush the Persian army decisively. The battle proved that collective effort, shared leadership, and disciplined execution could overcome even the mightiest adversaries. It also cemented a moral lesson. Freedom and survival are achieved not by individuals alone, but through solidarity and shared purpose. Cultural and historical significance. These three battles collectively defined Greek civilization. They shaped military doctrine, emphasizing the value of terrain, discipline, and tactical innovation. They inspired generations of leaders, soldiers, and citizens to understand that courage, intelligence, and unity could challenge even the largest empires. Artists, poets, and historians immortalized these events. The stories of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea became integral to Greek cultural identity, reinforcing values such as honor, sacrifice, and strategic acumen. Even centuries later, these battles influenced Renaissance thinkers, military strategists, and philosophers worldwide. Lessons in leadership. The battles demonstrated the critical role of leadership in shaping outcomes. Leonidas's bravery at Thermopylae inspired morale. Themistocles' cunning at Salamis orchestrated victory. Pausanias's coordination at Plataea secured decisive triumph. Leaders guided by vision, courage, and adaptability could transform even desperate situations into moments of opportunity. The Greek experience proved that leadership is not just about command, it is about inspiring, coordinating, and leveraging the strengths of those under one's charge. Enduring legacy in military thought. Military historians study these battles for their enduring lessons. Thermopylae illustrates the power of delaying tactics and morale. Salamis, the importance of environment and deception. Plataea, the effectiveness of unity, coordination, and decisive offensive action. Combined, they form a timeless blueprint. Small, disciplined, and intelligent forces acting with courage and cohesion can challenge overwhelming odds and shape the course of history. Modern military academies still teach these principles, showing that the strategies of ancient Greece remain relevant today. Moral and philosophical lessons. Beyond the battlefield, these events carried moral weight. Thermopylae teaches selfless courage. Salamis emphasizes ingenuity and adaptability. Plataea embodies collective effort and solidarity. Together, they remind humanity that freedom, justice, and civilization are not granted. They are defended through sacrifice, intelligence, and unity. These battles became metaphors for the human struggle against oppression and the pursuit of collective ideals. The Greek spirit cemented. The victories at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea forged the Greek spirit. Citizens understood the value of courage, the necessity of strategy, and the power of unity. These experiences laid the foundation for the classical age of Greece, a period of unprecedented cultural, political, and intellectual flourishing. The battles proved that even a collection of small city-states, when united in purpose and guided by visionary leadership, could withstand the might of empires. This spirit of resilience and ingenuity became the hallmark of Greek civilization. Inspiring generations. For centuries, the tales of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea inspired artists, writers, and thinkers. They provided moral guidance, examples of leadership, and models of strategic thought. Leaders from diverse civilizations studied these events, learning that courage, unity, and intelligence are timeless instruments of success. The legacy of these battles transcended time and geography, shaping not only Greece, but the broader Western world, influencing military doctrine, political philosophy, and cultural identity for millennia. Conclusion. The echoes of Thermopylae's sacrifice, Salamis's cunning, and Plataea's decisive unity continue to resonate. These battles are more than historical events. They are enduring symbols of human courage, strategic brilliance, and the power of collective effort. Through them, Greece demonstrated that freedom and civilization can be defended, that small, disciplined, and intelligent forces can defy overwhelming odds, and the human spirit, when united in purpose, can leave a legacy that transcends time. Thermopylae,
Salamis, and Plataea remain eternal lessons, reminding us that courage, strategy, and unity are as vital today as they were over 2 millennia ago. History remembers battles, armies, and empires, but it is the individuals, the leaders, the strategists, and the ordinary soldiers whose courage and vision define the course of events. In the epic struggles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea, certain names rise above the rest: Leonidas, Themistocles, and countless Greek champions whose bravery and leadership shaped the destiny of Greece. These figures exemplified the qualities that allowed a collection of small city-states to defy a seemingly unstoppable empire: courage, foresight, strategy, and the ability to inspire others to extraordinary deeds. Leonidas, the Spartan king of Thermopylae. Leonidas, king of Sparta, embodied the Spartan ideal: discipline, bravery, and selflessness. At Thermopylae, he led a small contingent of 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies to hold a narrow pass against Xerxes' massive army. Knowing the odds were overwhelming, Leonidas's leadership was not about hope of victory, but about strategic sacrifice. His decision to hold the pass bought critical time for Greek city-states to prepare, demonstrating that courage can influence the course of entire wars. Leonidas's heroism became legendary. He inspired not only his soldiers, but future generations, showing that true leadership involves personal sacrifice, unwavering resolve, and the ability to inspire unity in the face of near-certain defeat. Themistocles, mastermind of Salamis. If Leonidas represented courage and sacrifice, Themistocles embodied cunning, foresight, and strategic brilliance. As Athens' naval commander, he orchestrated the decisive victory at Salamis by luring the Persian fleet into narrow straits where Greek ships had a tactical advantage. Themistocles' genius lay in understanding both the psychology of his enemy and the dynamics of the battlefield. His innovative strategies neutralized the Persian numerical superiority and demonstrated that intellect and adaptability could turn the tide against overwhelming odds. Beyond his strategic genius, Themistocles inspired confidence and decisiveness among his forces, proving that leadership is as much about vision and communication as it is about courage. Pausanias, coordinator of Plataea. At Plataea, Spartan commander Pausanias played a crucial role in consolidating Greek unity. Unlike Thermopylae and Salamis, Plataea required seamless cooperation among multiple city-states with distinct traditions and rivalries. Pausanias' leadership ensured that the phalanx remained disciplined, that allied contingents coordinated effectively, and that Greek strategy could be executed with precision. His ability to balance authority, strategy, and diplomacy exemplified leadership in a coalition, proving that successful outcomes rely on both battlefield skill and interpersonal acumen. The unsung heroes. While leaders like Leonidas, Themistocles, and Pausanias dominate historical narratives, countless unnamed soldiers shaped the outcomes of these battles. The hoplites who held lines at Thermopylae, the sailors who maneuvered triremes at Salamis, and the infantry who fought at Plataea demonstrated extraordinary bravery and resilience. Their collective effort, courage under fire, and willingness to follow leaders' directives turned strategy into victory. These unsung heroes remind us that history is not only made by great names, but by the countless individuals who execute, endure, and persist. Courage, strategy, and sacrifice. Across these battles, 3 qualities consistently emerge among the heroes.
Courage. Facing impossible odds at Thermopylae or the chaos of Plataea required individuals to confront fear and act decisively. Strategy. Salamis and Plataea showcased the value of planning, innovation, and understanding both terrain and enemy psychology. sacrifice. Many leaders and soldiers understood that victory came at great personal risk, and they accepted that cost for the greater good. The combination of these qualities formed the foundation of Greek success, leaving a legacy that resonates in military and cultural history alike. Inspiration across generations. The stories of Leonidas and Themistocles inspired writers, philosophers, and military strategists for centuries. Thermopylae became a symbol of courage in the face of impossible odds. Salamis became a lesson in tactical brilliance and deception. Plataea became a model for unity and decisive action. The heroes' lives and decisions illustrate that leadership is not merely about command, it is about vision, courage, sacrifice, and the ability to inspire collective action. These principles remain relevant in leadership, strategy, and human endeavor today. Commemoration and memory. Monuments, poems, and historical accounts immortalized these heroes. Spartan temples honored the fallen at Thermopylae, while Athenian chronicles celebrated Themistocles' naval genius. Pausanias's coordination at Plataea was remembered in city-state alliances and military treatises. The act of remembering these heroes serves not only to honor their deeds, but to transmit the lessons of courage, leadership, and unity to future generations. Their legacy is not static. It continues to teach, inspire, and challenge those who face adversity. Moral lessons from the heroes. The stories of these leaders and soldiers carry enduring moral lessons. Courage and conviction can influence history even against overwhelming odds. Strategic insight and adaptability can turn vulnerabilities into advantages. Leadership involves both personal sacrifice and the ability to inspire collective action. Unity amplifies individual strength, proving that cooperation is often the most potent weapon. These lessons, born in ancient battlefields, continue to resonate in both military and civilian spheres, emphasizing the timeless relevance of heroism and strategy. Legacy in Western civilization. The impact of these heroes extended far beyond the battlefield. Their actions influenced political thought, military theory, literature, and cultural identity throughout Western civilization. The courage of Leonidas, the genius of Themistocles, and the coordination of Pausanias became touchstones for discussions on leadership, ethics, and strategy. Modern military academies, leadership seminars, and historical studies still draw from these examples, demonstrating that the lessons of courage, strategy, and unity are as vital today as they were over 2 millennia ago. The dust of Plataea had barely settled when Xerxes, king of Persia, returned to the vast palaces of his empire, carrying the bitter weight of a campaign that had failed spectacularly. The Persian army, once a seemingly invincible force stretching across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, had been humbled by the collective courage, strategy, and unity of the Greek city-states. While Greek storytellers immortalized their heroes, it is equally crucial to examine the Persian perspective, the decisions, miscalculations, and lessons learned from one of history's most ambitious military campaigns. Xerxes' ambition and miscalculations. Xerxes' vision was grand: to expand the Persian Empire westward, subdue the Greek city-states, and secure eternal glory for Persia. He commanded unprecedented resources, from massive infantry forces to naval fleets numbering in the hundreds of ships. Yet ambition alone cannot secure victory. Xerxes underestimated the Greeks' resilience, overestimated the effectiveness of sheer numbers, and misjudged the importance of unity and morale in his adversaries. His arrogance, coupled with overconfidence in Persian numerical superiority, became the Achilles heel of his campaign. Logistical challenges and strategic overreach. One of the critical mistakes of the Persian campaign was logistical overreach.
maintaining supply lines for hundreds of thousands of troops across hostile and rugged terrain proved increasingly difficult. Rivers, mountains, and the unpredictability of Greek territory slowed movements and exposed vulnerabilities. The Persian army's size, once considered an advantage, became a liability. Units struggled with communication, coordination faltered, and the sheer mass of troops made flexible, adaptive maneuvers nearly impossible. The Greeks, familiar with their terrain and operating in smaller, cohesive units, exploited these logistical weaknesses with precision. Thermopylae, a warning ignored. The stand of Leonidas and the Spartans at Thermopylae should have served as a warning. Despite overwhelming numbers, the narrow pass limited Persian advantages. Xerxes' generals hesitated, and the delay allowed Greek city-states time to consolidate defenses elsewhere. Instead of adapting strategy, Xerxes pressed forward with traditional tactics, relying on numbers rather than maneuver, and underestimated the morale and ingenuity of his opponents. The cost of ignoring the lessons of Thermopylae reverberated throughout subsequent battles. Salamis, the naval setback. Salamis highlighted another flaw: overconfidence in naval power without sufficient tactical planning. The Persian fleet, though massive, was lured into narrow straits by Themistocles' cunning. Ships became trapped, coordination broke down, and Greek triremes executed precise strikes that decimated the fleet. Xerxes' reliance on brute force rather than tactical intelligence contributed to the failure. Salamis was a clear lesson. Strategy and knowledge of terrain could outmatch even overwhelming resources, a reality the Persian command could not fully internalize until it was too late. Plataea, the crushing of ground forces. Plataea was the culmination of Persian mistakes. Disunity among commanders, fragmented troop formations, and inability to adapt to coordinated Greek attacks led to catastrophic losses. The Persian army's numbers could not compensate for the lack of cohesion, leadership, and morale. Greek discipline, Spartan resilience, and Athenian strategy combined to exploit every Persian weakness. The empire's finest troops were encircled, isolated, and defeated. Plataea was a stark reminder that numerical superiority alone cannot guarantee victory in complex, adaptive conflicts. Psychological lessons. Beyond logistics and tactics, the Persian leadership faced profound psychological lessons. Greek morale remained high, bolstered by unity, shared purpose, and inspirational leaders. Persian morale faltered under sustained resistance, miscommunication, and unexpected losses. Xerxes learned that conquering a civilization requires more than weapons. It requires understanding the psychological fabric of the enemy. A demoralized, disorganized, or fragmented force, no matter how numerous, can be defeated by smaller, determined opponents. The cost of underestimating the enemy. The Persian defeats underscored a timeless principle. Underestimating an opponent is often fatal. The Greeks' unity, discipline, and clever use of terrain proved decisive against a numerically superior but less coordinated force. Xerxes' misjudgment of Greek resilience and capability directly contributed to the campaign's failures. These defeats forced the Persians to reconsider their approach to empire building, military strategy, and engagement with independent, highly motivated adversaries. Lessons for future generations. For Persian historians and military thinkers, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea became case studies in the dangers of hubris, logistical mismanagement, and underestimating the human element in warfare. The campaigns demonstrated unity and morale matter as much as numbers. Adaptability and knowledge of terrain are force multipliers. Leadership must inspire, coordinate, and strategically allocate resources. Ignoring early warnings leads to cumulative disaster. These lessons resonated not only within Persia, but across the ancient world, influencing military strategy for centuries. Reflection on Xerxes' leadership. Xerxes himself returned home burdened by the consequences of his ambition. While resourceful and determined, he lacked the flexibility to adapt to unconventional tactics and the cohesive resistance of Greek forces. His leadership, defined by overwhelming authority and expectation of obedience, struggled when faced with decentralized, highly motivated opponents. In hindsight, Xerxes' campaign illustrates the limits of autocratic command when confronted by strategic ingenuity, decentralized resilience, and exceptional leadership on the opposing side. The Persian perspective in history. History often celebrates Greek victories, yet understanding the Persian perspective enriches our comprehension of these events. The defeats were not due to cowardice or incompetence alone. They were the result of logistical, strategic, and psychological challenges that even a mighty empire could not overcome. By examining the Persian viewpoint, we gain insight into the complexity of warfare, the challenges of commanding massive forces, and the enduring principles of strategy and leadership that transcend time. Legacy of the Persian defeat. The lessons of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea shaped Persian military doctrine, empire administration, and diplomatic strategy. Xerxes' failures highlighted the necessity of intelligence, adaptability, and respect for enemy capability. While the empire remained formidable, the campaign's outcomes reaffirmed the principle that even the greatest power can falter when strategy, morale, and unity are underestimated. Persia's defeat became a testament to the enduring value of courage, coordination, and strategic foresight. The dust of battle had settled, the cries of warriors had faded, and the Persian threat had been repelled. Yet the influence of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea extended far beyond the battlefield. The victories not only secured Greek freedom, but reshaped the political, social, and cultural landscape of the city-states, laying the foundations for democracy, civic identity, and a flourishing cultural heritage. Athens emerges as a naval power. The decisive role of the Athenian navy at Salamis elevated Athens to a position of prominence among the Greek city-states. Once primarily a regional power, Athens now commanded respect and influence across the Aegean. This newfound naval dominance allowed Athens to protect trade routes, expand commerce, and secure political alliances. Victories instilled confidence in the citizenry and reinforced the notion that Athens could lead in both military and civic affairs. Naval success translated into political leverage, empowering Athens to pursue democratic reforms and broader participation of its citizens in governance. The rise of democratic ideals. Greek victories emphasized the value of collective action and citizen participation. At Plataea, coordination among multiple city-states demonstrated that unity and cooperation could achieve remarkable outcomes. Ordinary soldiers, not just aristocratic leaders, played pivotal roles in determining the fate of Greece. This recognition of citizen contribution reinforced democratic ideals in Athens. Participation in defense, civic responsibility, and shared sacrifice became integral to the emerging democratic culture. The battles validated the principle that governance should reflect the collective will and capabilities of the people, not merely the ambitions of rulers. Spartan society and military ethos. For Sparta, the wars reaffirmed the centrality of military discipline, courage, and communal identity. Thermopylae, in particular, epitomized Spartan ideals: self-sacrifice, loyalty to the polis, and unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The heroic narrative of the 300 inspired generations to value physical training, collective discipline, and the ethical duty to defend one's city-state. Spartans' military ethos, now celebrated and mythologized, became a cultural cornerstone, influencing not only warfare, but education, social organization, and civic responsibility. Cultural renaissance and artistic expression. The victories against Persia inspired a wave of cultural expression across Greece. Artists, sculptors, and playwrights immortalized the heroes and events of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Drama and literature explored themes of sacrifice, courage, and moral duty. Playwrights like Aeschylus drew directly from Persian wars to examine human valor and the consequences of hubris. Sculpture and monumental art. Statues and monuments celebrated leaders, soldiers, and significant events. The human form, often idealized, conveyed strength, courage, and unity. Historiography. Historians such as Herodotus chronicled the wars with meticulous detail, blending factual reporting with narrative artistry to preserve lessons for future generations. These artistic endeavors solidified collective memory, ensuring that the moral, strategic, and civic lessons of the wars would endure. Philosophical reflection and civic virtue. Greek philosophers used the wars as a lens to explore ethics, duty, and civic virtue. The idea of arete, excellence in both character and action, was exemplified in soldiers and leaders alike. Lessons from these battles became central in discussions on leadership and moral responsibility. Courage under duress, the balance between individual action and collective good. The philosophical discourse shaped civic education, influencing how citizens understood their role within the polis and society at large. Political alliances and pan-Hellenic identity. The Persian Wars fostered a stronger sense of pan-Hellenic identity. While city-states maintained independence, shared experience in resisting a common enemy cultivated unity and mutual respect. The Delian League and other alliances emerged from this shared struggle, facilitating economic cooperation, military coordination, and cultural exchange. Greek identity evolved to encompass both local pride and broader civic solidarity, ensuring that the victories of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were not merely military but civilizational turning points. Impact on education and military training. The battles influenced Greek education and military practices for generations. Spartan youth were trained in the arts of warfare, discipline, and loyalty, while Athenians emphasized civic duty, strategy, and naval expertise. Schools incorporated lessons from these wars into curricula, teaching students the value of courage, critical thinking, and coordinated action. Military academies analyzed strategy, leadership, and logistics, ensuring that future generations could replicate and build upon the successes of their ancestors.
Commemoration and civic rituals. Victories were commemorated through festivals, sacrifices, and public ceremonies. The Pan-Athenaean in Athens, for example, celebrated both military achievements and civic unity. These rituals reinforced social cohesion, honored the dead, and reminded citizens of their collective responsibilities. Commemoration became a vital means of linking history, culture, and civic identity, ensuring that lessons learned were embedded in public consciousness. Influence on literature and storytelling. Stories of heroism, strategy, and sacrifice were passed down through oral traditions and written accounts. Epic poetry, drama, and historical narratives preserved the memory of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea for centuries. Heroic archetypes. Leonidas,
Themistocles and Pausanias became models of courage, strategy, and leadership. Moral lessons. Tales emphasized sacrifice, unity, and intelligence over brute force alone. Cultural memory. These narratives reinforced the values of freedom, civic duty, and collective responsibility across generations. Long-term civic and cultural legacy. The combined effect of military victories and cultural flourishing created a lasting legacy. Athens and Sparta, while different in governance and society, shared a commitment to civic virtue, defense of liberty, and celebration of human potential. The Persian Wars accelerated the classical age of Greece, laying the foundation for advances in philosophy, science, art, and governance. The battles were remembered not simply as military events, but as pivotal moments that shaped the trajectory of Western civilization. Conclusion: freedom, culture, and civic pride. The battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were more than battles. They were masterclasses in military strategy, innovation, and adaptation. The Greeks faced an enemy vastly larger, with resources seemingly unlimited, yet they turned disadvantage into advantage through ingenuity, discipline, and tactical brilliance. These confrontations became foundational in the study of warfare, influencing military thought for centuries to come. Every maneuver, formation, and strategy at these battles carried lessons that transcended the immediate conflict, shaping how armies would fight for generations. Phalanx formation, discipline, and cohesion. At the heart of Greek infantry tactics lay the phalanx, a tightly packed formation of hoplites, each shield protecting himself and partially covering his neighbor. This formation exemplified discipline, mutual reliance, and coordinated offense. Strength in unity. At Thermopylae and Plataea, the phalanx allowed relatively small Greek forces to hold against numerically superior Persians. Defensive resilience. Overlapping shields and long spears created a wall that was difficult to penetrate. Offensive capability. When advancing in unison, the phalanx could break enemy lines through sheer cohesion and momentum. The phalanx demonstrated that disciplined coordination could multiply the effectiveness of individual soldiers, proving that structure and training often outweigh numerical superiority. Use of terrain, maximizing advantage. Greek commanders mastered the art of using terrain strategically. Narrow passes, coastal straits, and elevated positions became force multipliers. Thermopylae. The narrow mountain pass neutralized the Persian numerical advantage, forcing Xerxes' army into choke points where size was irrelevant. Salamis. The Greek navy lured Persian ships into constricted waters, limiting maneuverability and amplifying the effectiveness of smaller, more agile triremes. Plataea. Knowledge of the plains allowed Greek forces to position themselves advantageously, anticipate Persian maneuvers, and exploit weaknesses. Terrain combined with strategy turned geographical familiarity into a decisive tactical advantage, a lesson military thinkers would study for millennia. Naval innovation and coordination. Salamis was a pivotal example of naval innovation. The Greeks, using triremes, light, fast, and maneuverable ships, exploited narrow waters where Persian numerical superiority could not be deployed effectively. Ramming tactics. Greek ships used speed and precision to ram Persian vessels at vulnerable points. Coordination and communication. Crews operated in unison, executing complex maneuvers with minimal error. Psychological warfare. Deception lured the Persian fleet into disadvantageous positions, highlighting the integration of strategy with tactical execution. These lessons demonstrated that warfare is not purely physical, it is psychological, with strategy influencing perception, morale and decision-making. Flexibility and adaptation. Greek commanders emphasized adaptation, responding to evolving battlefield conditions rather than relying solely on fixed plans. Thermopylae. Spartans adapted to repeated assaults, holding the pass against overwhelming numbers. Salamis. Greek ships adjusted tactics based on Persian movements and environmental conditions. Plataea. Coordination among city-states required real-time adjustments to maintain cohesion and exploit enemy weaknesses. Flexibility proved that rigid plans cannot overcome dynamic and adaptive adversaries. The ability to innovate under pressure is often decisive. Leadership lessons. The battles highlighted the integral role of leadership in executing strategy. Inspiration. Leonidas's courage inspired soldiers to hold against impossible odds. Vision. Themistocles anticipated enemy behavior, designing maneuvers that turned disadvantage into advantage. Coordination. Pausanias ensured Allied forces acted cohesively, maximizing the effectiveness of each contingent. Effective leadership combines moral authority, strategic vision, and practical execution, demonstrating that the best tactics are powerless without capable guidance. Discipline over numbers. Across all three battles, one principle stood clear. Discipline multiplies force. Small, well-trained, and cohesive units consistently outperformed larger, poorly coordinated armies.
These developments demonstrated that military success could directly influence economic and diplomatic strategy, extending Greece's reach across the region. Long-term economic impact. The Persian Wars laid the groundwork for centuries of prosperity and cultural achievement. Classical Athens. Leveraging wealth from trade and alliances, Athens financed democracy, philosophy, and monumental architecture. Spartan stability. Sparta maintained internal cohesion, agricultural security, and regional influence through disciplined governance and military preparedness. Regional growth. Interconnected trade networks and secure maritime routes facilitated commerce, cultural exchange, and political cooperation among city-states. The economic lessons of these wars influenced Greek strategy, civic policy, and international relations for generations. Conclusion. Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were battles that secured freedom, but their economic impact was equally profound. Military victories protected trade, stabilized economies, and created conditions for prosperity, cultural achievement, and civic development. Greece emerged not only as a military power, but as an economic hub of the Mediterranean, demonstrating that security, commerce, and cultural flourishing are interdependent. The lessons of the Persian Wars continue to resonate, highlighting the enduring link between strategic defense and economic success. The battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were not only historical events, they became enduring symbols, embedded in cultural memory and transformed into myth. Across generations, storytellers, poets, playwrights, and historians shaped the narrative of heroism, strategy, and sacrifice, turning these events into legends that defined Greek identity and influenced Western civilization. The power of storytelling. From the first oral accounts to the detailed chronicles of historians like Herodotus, the Persian Wars were recounted with dramatic flourish. Storytelling served multiple purposes. Preserving memory. Tales ensured that the bravery and strategy of Greeks would not be forgotten. Moral instruction. Stories illustrated virtues like courage, unity, and sacrifice. Cultural identity. Narratives reinforced shared values and Greek pride in the face of foreign invasion. Through storytelling, the Persian Wars transcended mere history, becoming a moral and cultural framework for generations. Thermopylae, the myth of the 300. Thermopylae captured the imagination like no other.
The story of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans became a symbol of selfless heroism. Over time, the historical account blended with legend. Heroic ideal. Spartans exemplified unwavering courage and the willingness to die for their polis. Sacred duty. The stand at the pass became a metaphor for moral and civic responsibility. Inspiration across time. Leaders and citizens across centuries looked to Thermopylae as a model of resilience over overwhelming odds. Even though historical details were sometimes simplified or exaggerated, the essence of sacrifice and valor endured, inspiring both Greek and global audiences. Salamis, the legend of strategy and ingenuity. While Thermopylae emphasized courage, Salamis highlighted intellect, foresight, and cunning. Themistocles' genius was celebrated in literature and art. Strategic mastery. The use of terrain and deception transformed an outnumbered fleet into victors. Naval heroism. Greek sailors became icons of ingenuity and teamwork. Cultural symbolism. Salamis came to symbolize the triumph of cleverness and planning over brute force. The story of Salamis was often mythologized to emphasize that intelligence, creativity, and adaptive leadership are as heroic as physical courage. Plataea, unity and collective heroism. Plataea, as the final decisive battle, reinforced the narrative of collective effort. Unlike Thermopylae and Salamis, which focused on individual or small group heroism, Plataea celebrated cooperation and solidarity. Pan-Hellenic achievement. Greek city-states, despite their differences, achieved victory together. Civic pride. Plataea underscored that democracy, cooperation, and shared purpose could defeat a formidable empire. Narrative legacy. The battle became a symbol of how coordinated action and solidarity are fundamental to success. Artistic representation and memory. Greek artists played a crucial role in myth-making, immortalizing battles through sculpture, pottery, and monumental art. Sculpture. Statues depicted heroic figures like Leonidas in idealized form, emphasizing strength, valor, and leadership. Pottery. Scenes of battle and naval encounters communicated both historical events and moral lessons. Public monuments. Temples and commemorative structures celebrated fallen heroes and civic achievements. Art transformed events into visual stories, reinforcing myths and embedding them in the collective imagination. Drama and literature. Greek playwrights and poets drew inspiration from the Persian Wars to explore universal themes. Tragedy. Playwrights like Aeschylus dramatized the moral and emotional dimensions of war, highlighting sacrifice, hubris, and fate. Epic poetry. Oral narratives celebrated heroism, endurance, and strategic brilliance, inspiring future generations. Historiography as narrative. Historians blended fact and storytelling, creating accounts that taught strategy, morality, and civic virtue. Through literature, the Persian Wars became more than events. They became allegories for courage, ingenuity, and the human condition. Symbolism in Greek culture. The battles transformed into symbols representing broader values. Freedom and resistance. Greece's victory over Persia symbolized the defense of liberty against tyranny. Civic responsibility. Citizens were reminded of their role in defending their polis. Human potential. The stories illustrated that intelligence, courage, and unity can overcome overwhelming adversity. These symbols became embedded in Greek culture, shaping identity, values, and collective memory. Transmission across generations. Myth-making ensured that lessons from the Persian Wars transcended immediate historical context. Education. Stories of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were taught to young Greeks to instill values of bravery, strategy, and civic duty. Oral tradition. Bards and storytellers preserved these narratives across regions and generations. Political use. Leaders invoked these myths to inspire loyalty, unity, and civic engagement. By embedding history within myth, Greeks created a timeless narrative that shaped both education and governance. Global influence of the myths. The cultural memory of these battles did not remain confined to Greece. In the Renaissance Europe, scholars and military leaders studied Greek myths to draw lessons in strategy and leadership. Modern literature and media. Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea inspired novels, films, and art that continued to captivate global audiences. Symbol of resistance. Across history, the stories of heroism and ingenuity have been referenced in struggles against oppression, emphasizing their universal relevance. Greek myth-making ensured that these events became templates for courage, strategy, and cultural identity worldwide. Conclusion. History transformed into myth. Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea exemplify how history can evolve into myth, blending fact with narrative to teach moral, strategic, and civic lessons. Through storytelling, art, literature, and commemoration, the Persian Wars became more than battles. They became enduring symbols of human courage, ingenuity, and unity. The myths shaped Greek identity, influenced generations of leaders and thinkers, and established a narrative of resistance, intelligence, and sacrifice that resonates to this day. Through myth-making, the Persian Wars achieved immortality, reminding humanity that heroism and strategy transcend the limits of time.
Morale maintenance. Disciplined troops withstand panic and sustain combat effectiveness. Execution of complex maneuvers. Cohesion allows advanced strategies to be implemented effectively. Force multiplication. Coordination and training amplify the combat power of each soldier, often outweighing numerical superiority. This principle has echoed through military history, from Macedonian phalanxes to modern armies. Enduring influence on military thought. The tactical innovations of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea influenced generations. Macedonian army. Philip II and Alexander the Great refined phalanx tactics and combined arms strategies. Roman legions. Flexibility, discipline, and coordination in the legions reflect lessons from Greek warfare. Modern military theory. Principles of terrain utilization, deception, and integration of forces remain core to contemporary strategy. These battles are studied as timeless examples of how intelligence, adaptability, and innovation can triumph over overwhelming odds. Conclusion. The Greek victories against Persia were shaped as much by tactical brilliance as by courage. Phalanx formations, terrain exploitation, combined arms, naval innovation, and psychological warfare demonstrated principles that endure in military theory. Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea proved that strategy, discipline, and adaptability can overcome numerical superiority, leaving a legacy of lessons that continue to guide military thought, leadership, and human ingenuity to this day. The battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea were fought on the fields and seas of Greece, yet their impact rippled far beyond the battlefield. These victories secured not only the freedom of the Greek city-states, but also reshaped their economic landscapes, trade networks, and influence across the Mediterranean. The wars created opportunities for commerce, wealth accumulation, and strategic control of trade routes, fundamentally altering Greece's economic trajectory for centuries. Athens, from regional city-state to economic powerhouse. Before the Persian Wars, Athens was an important city-state, but had yet to assert dominance across the Aegean. The decisive naval victory at Salamis propelled Athens into a position of strategic control over maritime routes. Maritime dominance. Athenian triremes now secured trade channels, ensuring safe passage for merchant vessels across the Aegean Sea. Expansion of trade. Athens could now establish and protect commercial relationships with distant ports,
importing luxury goods, grain, and raw materials, while exporting olive oil, pottery, and silver. Naval superiority allowed Athens to capitalize on commerce, fueling wealth that would later support cultural and intellectual achievements during the Classical Age. Sparta and the economy of military stability. While Athens flourished commercially, Sparta focused on the security and organization of its land-based economy. The victories at Thermopylae and Plataea ensured that Spartan territory remained secure from Persian incursions. Agricultural security. Spartan farms, dependent on a network of helots, remained intact, providing stable food supplies for its citizenry and military. Trade with allies. Although Sparta did not dominate maritime trade, secure borders enabled economic stability, allowing local markets and regional trade to prosper. Military as economic driver. Spartan society viewed military readiness as central to economic protection, with disciplined forces safeguarding trade routes and land assets. Sparta's approach highlighted the interplay between military strength and economic stability, demonstrating that security is a prerequisite for sustainable prosperity. Pan-Hellenic trade networks. The Persian Wars catalyzed increased cooperation among Greek city-states, facilitating broader trade networks across the Mediterranean. Shared security. Greek naval alliances ensured safer seas, allowing merchants to operate with reduced risk of piracy or Persian interference. Market expansion. Cities like Corinth and Aegina expanded trade, supplying goods to both local populations and allied states. Integration of resources. Allied city-states pooled resources, enabling joint economic projects and infrastructure development, such as ports, roads, and marketplaces. These developments created an interconnected Greek economy where prosperity in one city-state could positively impact others, fostering regional growth. Economic lessons from war. The Persian Wars underscored critical economic principles for Greek city-states. Investment in security pays dividends. Naval and military expenditure was not merely a cost, but an investment that secured trade, wealth, and influence. Unity enhances economic potential. Cooperative defense strengthened commerce as shared security reduced risks for merchants and traders. Innovation drives competitive advantage. Athens' investment in shipbuilding and naval technology translated directly into economic dominance. These lessons illustrated that economic growth and military strategy were intertwined, a principle reflected in Greek policies and civic priorities for generations. Wealth accumulation and cultural investment. The prosperity generated by secure trade routes enabled city-states to invest in culture, infrastructure, and public works. Temples and civic buildings, revenue from trade financed monumental architecture, reinforcing civic identity and religious devotion. Arts and education. Athens, in particular, channeled wealth into the arts, philosophy, and education, fostering a golden age that would define Western civilization. Public welfare. Economic stability allowed for festivals, athletic competitions, and public services, enhancing social cohesion and citizen engagement. This virtuous cycle thus created military success secured commerce, which funded culture, which in turn reinforced civic identity and pride. Control of strategic trade routes. Greek dominance over the Aegean and key Mediterranean passages allowed city-states to influence regional commerce and diplomacy. Straits and ports. Athens' control of strategic straits enabled regulation of shipping and tariffs, consolidating economic power. Access to resources. Trade facilitated access to grain from the Black Sea, timber from Thrace, and metals from islands like Euboea. Maritime influence. Greek fleets not only defended commerce, but projected power, deterring piracy and ensuring that trading partners adhered to agreements. By controlling trade routes, Greece translated military victories into lasting economic leverage. The role of merchants and citizens. The Persian Wars also highlighted the importance of civilian engagement in economic resilience. Merchants, shipbuilders, and artisans contributed to wartime logistics, constructing ships, supplying food, and maintaining infrastructure. Economic contribution to defense. Civilian economic activity directly supported military capability, demonstrating that prosperity and security were mutually reinforcing. Civic participation. Citizens, both soldiers and civilians, understood their role in sustaining city-state wealth, linking economic activity to shared survival and national pride. This integration of civilian labor, trade, and military effort reinforced the concept of civic responsibility central to Greek identity.